A 17-year-old girl was 3,200 feet in the air when the plane broke in half. She fell in free fall for more than 2 minutes, still strapped to her seat, and survived. But that was just the beginning of an 11-day journey that would change our understanding of the limits of human endurance. You'll discover how she used knowledge learned from her parents to find water, why she followed flies to survive, the sound that saved her at the last moment, and the terrifying discovery she made on day 4. If you stay until the end, I'll reveal the most shocking detail that she only shared 30 years later. Hit that like button if you're already intrigued. But before understanding how someone can survive the impossible, you need to meet Julianne Kepcha. Peru, 1971. A developing country with limited infrastructure. Julianne was the daughter of German biologists, raised in the Peruvian jungle from a young age. Ironically, what her parents did with her in childhood would be exactly what would save her life. Her parents, Hans Wilhelm and Maria Kupka, were dedicated scientists who ran a research station called Panguana, right in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. Since childhood, Julianne learned about the brutal yet generous nature of the jungle. She could identify medicinal plants, understood animal behavior, and most importantly, she knew how to find clean water in the midst of the Amazon's green chaos. But on December 24th, 1971, all of this would be put to the test in the worst possible way. It was Christmas Eve. Julianne, at 17, desperately wanted to arrive in time for her high school graduation. Her mother, Maria, would accompany her on the journey from Lima to Pucallpa, a city in Peru's interior. They chose Lanza Flight 508. What she didn't know was that she was boarding what would become one of the worst aviation disasters in Peru's history. 92 people boarded that Lockheed L-188 Electra that December morning. At 12:07, they took off. At 1 p.m., their lives changed forever. What happened in the next 60 seconds defies all logic of human survival. 40 minutes after takeoff, the plane entered a severe tropical storm. The turbulence was so intense that passengers desperately clung to their seats. Luggage fell from overhead compartments. Children cried. Adults prayed. That's when Maria Kepcha turned to her daughter and spoke the words that would be forever etched in Julianne's memory. "This is the end of everything." 3 seconds later, an intense white flash filled the entire aircraft cabin. Lightning had struck the aircraft directly, and then something that should have been impossible happened. The plane broke in half, literally. Julianne was still strapped to her seat when she was hurled out of the aircraft at 3,200 feet. Think about this for a moment. 3,200 feet means a free fall of more than 2 minutes. 2 complete minutes falling from the sky, conscious that death was inevitable. Statistically, she should have died. There was no precedent in aviation history of someone surviving such a fall. But 3 impossible factors aligned that day. First, she was still strapped to the airplane seat, which stabilized her fall and reduced terminal velocity. Second, the dense Amazon forest canopy created a natural cushioning system. Third, the torrential rain had softened the vegetation, making it less rigid. Julian describes the fall as surreal. She remembers seeing the forest approaching faster and faster, feeling the wind cutting her face, hearing the deafening sound of rushing air, and then complete silence. Julianne woke up 10 hours later. It was the morning of December 25th, Christmas. But there were no presents waiting for her, only pain, confusion, and the oppressive sound of the Amazon rainforest. Her injuries were severe: broken collarbone, deep cuts all over her body, a concussion that made her vision blurry. Her clothes were completely torn. One of her shoes had disappeared. But when she looked around, she realized something that chilled her blood. She was completely alone. Where were the other 91 people who had been on the plane? Where was her mother? What Julianne did in the next 30 minutes saved her life, and it was exactly the opposite of what most people would do. She didn't scream for help. Why? Because she remembered her parents' teachings. Screams in the jungle attract predators, not rescuers. She didn't stay put waiting for a rescue team that might never come. Instead, she made the smartest decision she could make. She remembered her father's voice echoing in her mind. "If you get lost in the jungle, follow the water. Water always leads to civilization. Ignoring the piercing pain in her broken body, Julianne began searching for water, and she found it. A small stream ran just a few hundred meters from where she had fallen, but she had no idea what she would encounter following that water for the next 11 days. Day 2. The thirst was unbearable. Julianne drank water directly from the stream, even knowing it was dirty and potentially contaminated. But when you're dying of thirst, dirty water is better than death by dehydration. The small stream she had found was gradually becoming larger as she followed it. Other small waterways joined it, forming something bigger. This was the right direction. Day 3. Hunger began to bite. Julian found some aircraft debris scattered through the forest. Open suitcases, twisted metal pieces, broken seats. But what she desperately searched for, she didn't find. No survivors. It was on the third day that she made a decision that almost killed her. The stream had transformed into a small river with strong current. Tired of walking along the muddy, obstacle-filled bank, Julian decided to swim across the current to reach the other side. She almost drowned. The current was much stronger than it appeared. Her injuries limited her movements. For some terrifying moments, she thought that surviving the plane crash only to die drowning would be the cruelest irony possible. But she managed to grab onto a rock and drag herself out of the water. The lesson was learned. In the jungle, patience can be more important than courage. Day 4. It was on the 4th day that she made a discovery that haunted her for the rest of her life. Following the river, Julian found something that made her stop abruptly. 3 rows of airplane seats, still intact, with 3 bodies strapped in by their seatbelts. They had initially survived the fall. Julianne could see signs that at least one of them had been conscious after impact. There were marks in the mud around the seats, indicating movement, but they had been dead for days. The emotional weight of this discovery was devastating. Julianne realized that if she had found this location earlier, she might have been able to save at least one of these people. Survivor's guilt began to corrode her already fragile mind, but she couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying. From the 6th day onward, it wasn't just about physical survival anymore. It was a mental battle. Julianne's injuries were becoming infected. Her broken collarbone made every movement agony. The cuts on her body began attracting flies, and with the flies came maggots. Maggots literally began forming inside her open wounds. Using knowledge that her mother, who was a nurse as well as a biologist, had taught her, Julianne tried to clean the wounds with river water. But without medications or surgical instruments, there was little she could do. And then the hallucinations began. On the 7th day, Julianne started hearing voices. Voices calling her name. Voices asking for help. She would run toward the sounds, ignoring the pain, only to discover no one was there. Sometimes she saw silhouettes among the trees. Human figures that disappeared when she approached. The line between reality and imagination was becoming increasingly blurred. But on the 8th day, she noticed something that changed everything. Flies. Not the flies tormenting her wounds, but another type. Larger flies, flying in a specific direction, in organized groups. And then she remembered another lesson from her parents. Flies follow cattle. Cattle means farms. Farms mean people. For the first time in over a week, Julianne felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. She began following the flies. Day 9. The small river had become a real river. Deeper, wider waters flowing with more force toward some unknown destination, and along with the larger river came the first unmistakable signs of human activity. A crushed soda can on the bank. Machete marks on some trees. A piece of rope tied to a branch. Julianne didn't know it, but she was less than 48 hours from being found. Day 10. Her physical strength was at its absolute limit. She had lost significant weight. Her injuries continued worsening. Every step was a monumental effort, but signs of civilization were becoming more frequent. Trails obviously made by humans. More litter. And then, at the end of the afternoon on the 10th day, she saw something that made her heart race. A canoe. A wooden canoe, simple but well-maintained, pulled up on the riverbank. But the canoe was empty, and night was approaching. Julianne had to make the most difficult decision of her life. Should she take the canoe and try to navigate downstream in the darkness? Or should she wait for the canoe's owners, risking that they might never return? She decided to wait. It was the longest night of her life. Sitting beside the canoe, Julianne heard all the nocturnal sounds of the jungle, the distant roar of jaguars, the movement of large animals through the vegetation. Every shadow seemed to hide a predator. To clean her infected wounds, she used gasoline she found in the bottom of the canoe. The pain was unbearable, but she knew the infection could kill her before the predators even found her. On the morning of the 11th day, Julian heard voices. But were they real, or just another hallucination? The voices were real. Three Peruvian lumberjacks were returning to retrieve their canoe when they found something they never expected to see. A blonde girl, clearly injured, sitting beside their boat in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. What happened when the lumberjacks found her was almost as unbelievable as her survival. Initially, they didn't believe her story. A German teenager talking about a plane crash? They thought she was a missionary's daughter who had gotten lost during a hike. But when Julianne managed to explain who she was, when she mentioned Lanza Flight 508, when she described the exact date of the accident, the shock on the men's faces was indescribable. They were standing before the sole survivor of one of Peru's worst aviation disasters. The lumberjacks took her to the nearest community where a small plane could land to rescue her. Within hours, the story spread throughout Peru and then around the entire world. Headlines in dozens of languages. Miracle Girl survives plane crash. Sole survivor of aviation tragedy. 17 years old, 11 days, a lifetime of courage. But the story the world knew in 1971 wasn't complete. What Julianne revealed 30 years later shocked even the most experienced survival experts. In an interview conducted in 2001, exactly 30 years after the accident, Julianne Kupska revealed something she had kept secret for 3 decades. She had not been completely alone in the first days after the crash. During the first 3 days in the jungle, Julianne heard cries for help, human voices, distant but clearly audible, calling for rescue. She tried to follow the sounds, but her debilitated physical condition and the forest's density made it impossible to locate the sources. As days passed, the voices grew weaker until they stopped completely. The psychological weight of this revelation was devastating. For 30 years, Julianne had carried the guilt of knowing that other passengers had survived the initial impact, but died while she managed to save herself. Trauma specialists call this survivor's guilt, the irrational guilt some feel for having survived when others couldn't. For Julianne, this guilt was amplified by the certainty that she could have helped someone. But life went on. Julianne grew up and became a biologist, just like her parents. She returned to work in the same forest that had nearly killed her, dedicating her life to studying and preserving the Amazon. In 1998, she did something no one expected. She returned to the exact location where the plane had crashed. Accompanied by German director Werner Herzog, who made a documentary about her story, Julianne returned to the Peruvian jungle 27 years after the tragedy. What she found there was both disturbing and cathartic. Pieces of the airplane were still visible, now covered by decades of forest growth. Vines had embraced the metal wreckage. Nature had reclaimed the remains of the tragedy, transforming them into part of the forest itself. Touching those remnants after so much time brought a sense of closure that Julianne didn't know she needed. Julianne Kupka's story teaches us 5 fundamental lessons about survival, lessons that go far beyond being lost in the jungle. First lesson, unconscious preparation. Julianne didn't wake up one day deciding to learn survival techniques. Her knowledge was absorbed naturally through living with scientist parents and life in the forest. Sometimes the most valuable education happens without us realizing it. Second lesson, mentality. Julianne didn't panic. Even at 17, in a situation of absolute terror, she managed to think logically and make rational decisions. Panic kills more people in emergency situations than the dangers themselves. Third lesson, logical decisions based on knowledge. Following water, not screaming for help, not staying put waiting for rescue. All of these were intelligent choices based on what she had learned about the jungle. Fourth lesson, persistence. Even when hallucinations began, Even when pain became almost unbearable, Julianne never gave up. She kept moving, kept fighting, kept believing there was a way out. Fifth lesson, adaptation. When she made the mistake of trying to swim in the strong current, she learned to be more cautious. When she discovered maggots in her wounds, she found a way to treat them. Survival is about constant adaptation. But perhaps the most important lesson of all is this. Julianne Kupski didn't survive by luck. She survived because, even at 17, she understood something fundamental about human nature. Sometimes the difference between life and death isn't physical strength, but mental strength. It's not the size of your muscles, but the size of your determination. Today, Julianne is over 65 years old. She still works as a biologist. She still lives in Peru. And she still, from time to time, returns to that forest. Not as a victim, but as someone who understands its secrets better than almost anyone in the world. Her story reminds us that humans are capable of extraordinary things when they need to be, that knowledge is power, that mental preparation is as important as physical preparation, and that sometimes surviving is about much more than just not dying. It's about discovering what you're truly capable of. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect on your own inner strength, please give this video a like and tell me in the comments, do you think you would have had the same mental strength that Julian had at 17? If you want more incredible stories of human survival, stories that challenge our notions about the limits of what's possible, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. And in the next video, I'll tell you the even more disturbing story of a man who survived 76 days lost in the ocean, drinking his own urine and fighting off sharks with his bare hands. You won't want to miss that one. See you next time.